Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots. We are families of virtue, where we're reclaiming virtue to bring that virtue into our homes and yours. I'm Thomas McCuddy.
And I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And today's we're going to talk about how should Christian families approach technology with virtue in mind. I cannot imagine how much I have to say about this and how much you guys have to say about this. But I'm going to begin off with 1 Corinthians 10:23 through 11:1. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, "This has been offered in sacrifice," then do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And so I wanted to lead with that one because I kind of think it sets a tone. I know that it's not talking about technology in and of itself, but I think it's got a spirit there, of what we're trying to look at as we have this conversation. And so I know you guys both have young kids. I have older kids and grandchildren. And even for myself, I'm not even going to try to play here. Like, even for myself, the idea of using technology with virtue in mind this is not an easy conversation. It's not an easy conversation at all. And so what do you think the number one piece of technology right now that we have to, let's talk about one type of technology before, so it's not just this everything. What is the one piece of technology that you think is the biggest threat to virtue in the family? I don't care. One of you can
I would say the cell phone.
Interesting. Okay.
I think in terms of the threat, the cell phone, because, well, and no, I'll walk that back, because my reason for saying the threat is because to be able to have access to so much darkness in the world right there in your hand, but tablets with Wi-Fi do the same thing.
Yeah. So that was my question, is when you say cell phone, are we talking the supercomputer that we have in our pocket, or the ability to call somebody?
I said the supercomputer
Okay,
aspect.
so we're talking about access to. You're talking about. So you think the biggest threat is the access to the information?
Well, no, but I also think the phone itself, because that access now is with you all the time.
Okay.
Your kids have
So
cell
the
phones.
portability of it.
Yeah,
right?
and you can just, because as we get into this discussion, and I think because it's not, and you reading the scripture, it's not wrong. Like there is like the phone, because it has capability of, because it's good to access the information, in the right way and in the right type of information, but it could be used for evil, and it's done that. And it's also because part of what this is as we're trying to, using virtue language, temper our access and our usage of technology, or it doesn't consume us completely. And I find that cell phones, because of its nature, like, it's with us.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever, like, we're in any situation, we can just always, it's almost, I do it myself, and it drives me nuts. It's like, whenever you're in a moment of you're not talking to somebody or engaging anything, you have your phone out, you're scrolling, and you're just completely consumed in that, and
Right.
and you're kind of losing track of the world around you.
I think that's where a lot of parents, the pushback against technology and with phones is because we're creating bad habits, and we call those vices.
Yeah.
So we're cultivating in ourselves this inability to focus, this inability to just sit and be. And I noticed this in particular. This is part of the reason this comes up, is when we were traveling back, and our long trip was 14 hours. So in the car, 14 hours. Now, all my kids, none of my kids have cell phones, but they have tablets. And so my wife, when we get started, she's like, we do not immediately go to the tablets. And at some point, our kid inevitably like, well, something happened and one of them didn't have something to do. And they were like, but I don't have anything to do. And my wife was like, that's okay. Enjoy the scenery. Talk to somebody. Rest. You don't have to be stimulated
Yeah.
every single moment. And I think that's where, again, this is why the question of what's virtuous use of the technology look like, because if I can use this analogy also from Scripture, is that in Acts, when Paul goes to Mars Hill, we're told that he's facing the Epicureans and the Stoics. And the Epicureans, they are the ones who are we talked about it in a previous episode, they're the hedonists. They're the ones who seek pleasure as their greatest good. And that's how they find their fulfillment. The Stoics are much more like, if you think of modern Star Wars, get rid of attachments, get rid of your passions and your desires. And they saw our passions and pleasures as actually a corruption.
Okay.
So we're not supposed to have any of that. So I think in some ways, families can fall into the Epicurean, oh, just go look at whatever, spend the time, the tablet is your babysitter. On the other side, we might go the Stoic route where we're just going to cut out all pleasures from these and only use them if we absolutely have to. And so when we want to ask, well, what's the virtuous use in the middle? Because there is a very real danger. There is a very real, and there's research, I can't quote any of it, but everybody talks about how the phone and tablets, the constant electronic stimulation
Yeah.
changes your brain. And I was even reading
They now call it TikTok brain.
TikTok brain.
That's kind of the running terminology for it.
Easy enough. So there was, I cannot remember what I was reading, but there was, and I was actually reading it on a Kindle. That's what's funny. So on it,
Irony.
yeah. But he points out how he himself has the trouble sitting down and reading from beginning to end, that you find yourself needing that switch, and we train our brain to do that. So the question then becomes, how do we have a virtuous use? Because, as has been said, this technology is not going anywhere.
Right.
It's just going to increase. And as everything's going online, schools, I mean, just about if a school does not have an online division, they're dead in the water.
Yeah, you're talking about upper, high
Yeah,
school or
the high school.
college. I mean,
Well, even so this is why this is important, because I saw this article. I don't know if you wear this. I know it's in Arizona, and I think there's other states in the United States that are doing this. But for 2 hours a day, students get AI instruction.
makes me sick to my
It's
stomach.
the AI instructor. So they only have a facilitator, and they basically, and by saying AI, it might be something like one of the online institutes. They're doing something online while they're there in the physical school.
Okay, that's different.
Okay. But that's what it's moving towards, is where you will actually have an AI teacher. Because when I want to, you scoff at me about Latin. Who am I going to talk to about Latin? Well, the AI, the Chat GPT, is a great one to talk to about Latin. Like, give me some vocabulary. I actually have a partner now in technology. Okay, so I was like, and as people like, well, what are we going to do with AI? I began looking at this like, wait a minute, this is helping me with my language instruction. This is not a bad thing. This is a good thing.
Well, we've had the conversations about the idea of taking all the church fathers and philosophers and their writings and putting into a database and actually having conversations with them. Like,
Yes,
you're right. I mean, that's what the question is how do we do that with virtue in mind? You're talking kind of on an upper echelon, right? This idea up here. So then how does this now extend to our children?
Well, and I think that's why, and we joke that this whole topic could be like an entire series. Like, we could go a lot of places with this. So to hone it in, to get some basic principles on virtuous use with children, I think this is why the general concept of virtue is going to guide the best, because the first and foremost question you have to ask is, what kind of children do you have? Do you have children that are prone towards addiction towards the tablet, addiction towards the screen? Because if you do, that's going to change. I think it's at different levels.
I don't know if I've ever met a child who's not prone to that. Who, when given the ability,
right.
There are I would say it is a huge exception to the rule that there are children who would not default to as much time as they can get.
And I think they're somewhat designed that way too. That tablet is very attractive. Like for me, even as an adult, like I understand its utility, but like we never like when I was growing up, we didn't have something that's all encompassing. Like I mean, we had video games and other things, but the way they're designed today, it encourages them to just get immersed in the technology.
So I'm gonna ask this. So here's the problem. I think we're talking about I don't think we're talking about. I think we've kind of moved. Like we're saying the word tablet, but I need to narrow this down because the tablet is talking about far more than just this, right? So we're not going to talk about tablets. We're not going to talk about phones. We're not going to talk about computers. Okay. Let's talk about the technology that we're actually talking about. So you're saying you can get immersed. What tech in and of itself are you referring to?
Well, the tech I'm referring to is like any sort of like I would say tablets in that sense.
No. Like what on the tablet are they getting
Oh,
immersed
like
in?
it could be YouTube videos, and it could be video games and like just kind of,
So you're talking about instant on-demand entertainment
Yep.
and also the video game. So an augmented reality type of
Yep.
idea escape. When you're talking about it and you're talking about tablets, what are you specifically talking about?
I think it's I think it's the whole experience because I think sometimes parents are leery about the experience itself as if the screen is bad. And I think this is why it becomes a muddied issue because like
Well,
my
that's why I'm trying
kids.
to break it out, right?
Right.
That's why because I think saying tablet is misleading in every way
Mhm.
because there's a lot of really good things that can happen on it. So let's talk about the specifics and not the overall experience. Let's talk about specifics as to where's the negative.
Mhm. That negative is that unrestricted meandering, kind of like with the YouTube, with, just giving them the opportunity to go out into the World Wide Web.
For sure. I
That's
mean,
yeah.
I will Google normal website or try to find normal things, and I run across websites I absolutely don't want to see. And I'm a grown man. I know what not to Google.
There was a commercial back in the day. It was these kids, and they were trying to look up the movie Babe using the pig,
No,
like the
no.
pig named Babe.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, let's go to babe.com." And they're like, "That's not Babe." So
Right, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
I know what not to Google, and I still have these issues.
So
So,
I think in terms of again what is the virtuous use? I think in on the one side it's recognizing that there are bad uses of this technology like that unrestricted access, letting them out into the web. But I think there is an element where like in the case of my kids, they they're more interested in more like the movies and the TV. Like that's what I'm having to focus on with them is that again, if they're bored, can I watch a movie? Can I do and they immediately
well, I mean,
go
this
to
is how
that.
we grew up with the TV sitting in front of us. I mean, so you're fighting what our parents should have fought. I don't know if mine did, but you're fighting what our parents should have fought, right?
Well, and for our parents, it was easier because you had the one screen in the room,
Mm.
so you could only do so much.
Yeah.
But now, like in my case, I've had this scenario where I'm gonna tell my kids, okay, if you guys want to watch a movie, pick a movie, and they can't agree, they're like, well, can I just take one tablet here? I was like, and my wife is like, we are not gonna watch separate movies, in different rooms. That's not gonna happen. And I think that's why the whole idea of virtuous use, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But there is this precedent of no, we need to come together as a family. We need to temper our own pleasures or desires. And I think that's why, again, this conversation can go so many different directions. I think in my mind, keeping it much more general in the sense of we as parents need to step back and ask these questions.
Yeah.
So that's might be more of what we do now. What are the kinds of questions we need to be asking? Um, because the question that does become, how are our kids using it? And what is that virtuous use? And that's what I want to. It's funny. We're going to have my wife in on this conversation in a future episode because she and I are sort of on the opposite ends of that. My wife is. We've been flirting with the idea of having we even own the domain for screenfreesummer.com.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, and I'm in favor of that. Like I'm not against that at all. But she would go screen free year or screen free life. And um, I'm not speaking ill of her by any means. I'm not making fun of her for that. I think that it's good because she and I balance each other because I might overuse, she might underuse. And I think that's why in our family, when she and I put our heads together with this, I think we end with the more virtuous use because we're trying to seek that balance and we have representatives. Now, in other families, it might be different where you might have both parents are like, no, we love the tablet. We want to do all that. Well, then how do you both have to pull that back? But you have to do it in a way that again is, and to use that word as general as we can, the virtuous, what's the good, what's the reasonable, what is the way that glorifies God, that honors God, that in the same way that the kids need to learn how to navigate the web, but they don't need to do all that on their own. And that becomes the question, and why I don't want parents to come away thinking there's a formula, because I don't think
when
there
there's
is.
not, right?
There's not.
So, okay, I, I'm on board with what you're saying, and I'm taking some notes over here, and we're definitely gonna kind of spin these out. So
Because
I'm
we have technology in front of us.
right,
So
well,
for
exactly.
those who
While
can't
we're doing
see,
it,
we've
I'm
got
literally
tablets
sitting
out.
here. Yeah. And so I want to do something specific on social media. I want to do something specific on the AI, and I want to do something specific on like streaming entertainment. And then I want to do something specific on technology type um, way pieces of tech that improve our life kind of outside of like what we're talking about, the phone in the pocket, but maybe some of the tools that we use to kind of organize and streamline businesses and say, there are good uses of these types of things. So I do want to, because we don't have nearly enough time to dive into any of these specifically today, but we're kind of toying with this idea though that technology can be good, technology can improve, we can use technology in a virtuous way. There's no way we can add a formula to it. So, is there any way in which a father can use technology for 2.5 hours outside of his work? Outside of his work schedule. Is there any way that a father can use technology for 2.5 hours a day virtuously? What I mean by that is, I would say that most parents spend a lot of time wrapped up in technology, whatever it is. Is there any way that I can use, we'll just, is there any way I can use technology for 2.5 hours in a virtuous way outside of my normal working hours?
So to offer concretes, because again, we don't have formulas, but as examples,
Mhm.
like when we as a family, um, and we'll go, since we're talking technology and screens, we'll go straight to something that is entirely entertainment based. So we got a Switch for
Mhm.
Christmas, the Nintendo Switch, and we have not gotten one for, we've held the kids off for a long time, and the question comes back to entertainment, all this. But part of the way we did it is when we got this, we focus and we hone in on games that we play as a family.
Mhm.
And that's why when we've got the kinds of things that we made sure we had enough remotes, we looked at it, we examined how do we play these things. And even when we borrowed some games, and if they're individual games, it's funny, my boys all do this together. It's almost kind of annoying because when I'm when I'm doing it, they're all trying to tell me what to do. But it becomes a family affair.
Mhm.
It's not just people in their own little world.
Okay.
And so I think when we begin thinking more in terms of the family enrichment, listening to audiobooks would be part of that technology. We do that through the tablets in our case, but that's where we, as a family, we have books we're
Well, let's
listening.
be honest. Like audiobooks were just going back to radio shows predating television, right? It's just a newer version of that.
It is.
And reading on the Kindle is the same as reading a book. Now let's talk about outside of
Well,
like
but
those.
see that's why I want to bring that up, Nick, because there's some who would see, and I've had this conversation. Nope, the Kindle's a screen. We can't do that.
Yeah, it's insane.
Okay, so
That's insanity.
there is that element of, if we push too far, all screens become bad, then we're going to throw out things like Kindles, where again, I'll buy
But
a
then
Kindle.
we get into your favorite virtue, a lack of prudence at that point. Like we're just really just not looking at it for what it is. It's just, whole hog on, instead of actually using some wisdom there and
Mhm.
viewing them differently.
And even the idea of forbidding something would maybe entice the child when he gets his opportunity to make the choices for himself to overindulge in
For
the
sure.
future.
I think that's what happens sometimes with video games, and that's been some of my concern because I know what it's like to be so wrapped up in video games.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I think if you let a kid dive into video games, they're going to get hooked. And I think if you try to, I think video games are so appealing because it is a genuine escape from reality. It is a way to flee all things real.
but that's why we don't allow the dive in. We don't go into that. There is
Right.
that element. What is the virtuous use? Because
I hear what you're saying.
Mhm.
So, okay, we make it a family affair, but that doesn't yet answer my question,
okay,
because I don't think you're saying that you as a family can play video games for 2.5 hours a day and you think that's a virtuous use of technology. Correct?
correct.
I'm going to ask you, is there a way that as a man, I can use technology for 2.5 hours in a virtuous way outside of my normal working hours? And the reason I'm adding that last part is, I'm not one of them anymore, but some guys work on a computer 8 hours a day, right? Like, so I want to restrict the what we do for a living. But is there a way that I can spend 2.5 hours with technology in a virtuous way?
Well, I mean, is you thinking of using technology as being some isolated thing where I'm just doing this and neglecting other things that I'm doing, or like you're just
Well, I think that's what happens. But
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
no. I'm asking, can it be done in a virtuous way? Because I think that we have an overabundance and overuse of it where it detracts from our families. So
Yeah.
what I want to know, and it's a genuine question, can you think of a way in which, and that's why I gave kind of a higher number, in which we can use it for 2.5 hours. So I get home at 5 o'clock. Between 5 o'clock and the time I go to bed, is there a virtuous way to use 2.5 hours of those time on technology?
Well, I think
Other than with Logos Bible software,
Yeah,
where
that's
I'm
exactly
where
where I
I'm
was gonna go.
studying scripture.
that was exactly where I was going to go, because I think that's one of the representations of technology that, for those who've not experienced the program Logos,
I love it.
the
amazing.
the amount that I have invested in this thing over the years,
I don't
but
even want to know.
yeah, it'll tell you. That's the really sad thing.
I have a car
Yeah.
invested.
So, but the reason is because the resources and what it does, not just for my professional study,
Mhm.
but even just my own personal study, whether it's the languages
Okay.
or
Let's take
any
that
of
out.
that.
A normal
So-
person doesn't have that.
Okay.
So I think the answer
maybe they
is you guys.
should.
I think
Maybe they
well,
should.
I agree. So I really think the fact that you guys are struggling so hard, I think that's the point. Is I don't know what the statistics are, but I think they're close to 2.5 hours of television time or scrolling on social media. You just said a little while ago, Thomas, that you're sitting there and you find yourself scrolling on your phone.
Yeah.
I would like to know what the statistics are for the amount of time that people now take to use the restroom.
Yeah.
I know it's far longer than it had to used to be because people get in there and they start scrolling. And I mean, it's something that people complain about on a regular basis, right?
And I think that's the key kind of misuse of technology, that by always pulling that phone out, and I'm one of those who does that too. And I hate that about myself. And for me, that's why I recognize this phone is important to me because of work and because of the kinds of things I do. So it's a tool, but I've been misusing this tool.
For sure.
And so my wife had even looked into, there's a minimalist phone that does not allow any of like the social media, any of those. It just has like the GPS, the basic kinds of tool things, but there's no browsers. And so I looked at that. I'm like, there's too much of my life and there's too many times when I'm like in a foreign country, I need that.
Mhm.
That's a tool. But what I don't need is the easy access to the social media, because that's what you do. You pull out your phone and just boom, a button, you start scrolling. So I took those things off. I put those limiters in me, limiters on there. And so now I use my phone a whole lot less.
Mhm.
I'm not drawn to it that way, but I still retain the tool that it is.
So I think what you just keyed in on, and it's kind of what I was going after, is that even as parents, I think the idea of this overindulgence of technology this time that we spend is far too much. And what you just keyed in on is that I think you even used an app to help you with it, but you basically cultivated temperance when it came to your use of your phone, and you actually just pulled it back and made sure that you really got to dial it back and have a control and really showing virtue in that use. And so I think kind of what I was trying to go after is a virtuous use of technology absolutely involves the idea of temperance and pulling back and not making it to be everything in our life or even too much.
Exactly.
Gentlemen, as always, absolutely great conversation. We are going to carry this conversation on. We don't have a choice. I think there's too much to talk about here, and I think it's impacts families far too much to ignore. So thank you very much. You can find us at familiesofvirtue.com, and our podcast, Virtuous Roots, is on all the main streaming platforms. And we will talk to you next time.